Hi there. Today I want to talk about lead management SLAs and how to measure them in Salesforce. We'll go into the kinds of fields you need to create, the levels of complexity you can get, and some of the reporting that is enabled when you're able to automate this. So just to start, I'm Todd. I'm a principal solution architect at Sponge. I am a Salesforce certified advanced admin. I am the 2022 MOPSI's Technician Award winner. You can see my little goat statue here. Um, and I've been in the marketing and sales ops game for about 13 years now. Previously worked at Logi and Snagajob. So what we're talking about today is creating these lead management SLAs, how to measure them specifically to, streamline and automate your processes where possible, and how having this be able to be reported upon both in real time and historically can help to remarkably improve your compliance with those SLAs. I feel like a lot of times there's a lot of argument about who's going to call leads, whether it's AEs or PDRs, and as a marketer, I really only care that somebody calls them. There's a lot of hurdles there. Sales managers are understandably focused on pipe and getting their deals to close for their team, not necessarily managing the early leads. But we kind of want to get our best foot forward. And most SLA reports that are crafted are kind of too late in the game where there's no action to be taken now. We're just kind of looking at what happened already last week, month, quarter, and there's nothing to do about it. So, in the past, we've seen clients who, once we've turned this on, they found they're only meeting their SLA 30% of the time, and then within 2 months got this up to 85%. So, really hammering home that once you start measuring this, it's easier to actually be in compliance. Just to back up a little, let's talk about what an SLA is and isn't. Short story, SLAs stands for service level agreements. It's an agreement between marketing and sales leadership in terms of what is an MQL. And then once that is happened, who's responsible for it, what type of follow-up is expected of that person, whether it's an AE or a BDR. So this is both a prescription on how quickly we want to get after these leads in terms of that first touch, as well as, how many subsequent touches we expect to have as a minimum sort of follow-up. We don't want to have, one and dones, as I'm sure all of you are aware. So this isn't just like a pie in the sky aspirational thing that we want to subscribe to. This is, a vital handoff point in the process, and getting this process as, scalable and repeatable as possible. This is a big multiplier in terms of, pipeline that comes out of the MQLs you're already producing. So we want to define like who is responsible for the prospect at every step of the way along the process. Is there certain information that we need required? For example, do we need a phone number in order to be able to consider something ready for sales follow-up? How long do we have that, time? What's the time required before we need to have touched that at the beginning? If they miss that SLA, what do we do? Do we send some shame alert to say, hey, get on this? Do we reassign it to somebody else? What does that alert process look like? So these are all the things you want to be trying to identify. And typically without this process kind of formalized and automated within Salesforce, it looks something like, oh, they're supposed to call within 24 hours. And, maybe we'll notice down the line, but this tends to be really hard to report on in Salesforce. And you'll find yourself creating reports that look kind of like this, where you're looking at MQLs with a list of activities for each of those that may or may not exist. And this is just a really gross manual process that's hard to figure out at a glance, how are we doing on what we said we were going to do. If you can streamline it and automate this and have it be more formalized within your org, you might have it down to something as fancy as this of like, some of our MQLs are going to get assigned to an AE. They have 2 hours to accept or reject, or they'll lose it and it'll go to a BDR. Once they accept, they have 2 hours to log a call, or they lose it again. So giving AEs that kind of first crack at the bat there, but if they don't do what they're supposed to, then they lose it. And then, after logging the first call, you're supposed to be logging a follow-up task for the future. Again, if you don't, you lose it kind of thing. So this is an example of like a super fancy two-tiered approach with all of the fallbacks. Now, you don't have to start this complicated. In fact, I highly recommend you don't. But even if you have something that complicated, I like to then simplify this way down to just a green or red flag formula in Salesforce that's very easy for a human being to look at and know, immediately, what am I supposed to do? Green flag, good. Red flag, bad. If you see red flags, that means you need to pick up the phone. Sometimes I'll also incorporate a yellow flag that says like, hey, this isn't a problem yet, but action is required. The point being is that it's very simple and easily digestible. And so then you can add that onto your list views and see, very quickly, okay, what am I looking good? What's the story here? Some SLAs that I recommend. I'm a firm believer that, like a lot of things, you should just start somewhere. The MQL handoff point between marketing and sales is, a very obvious first place to start. And you might have that be like, okay, we want to have all of our reps accept or reject our MQLs within a certain amount of time. In my opinion, there is absolutely no reason that this should be any longer than 2 business days. Like, if you can't get on an MQL in 2 business days, we either don't have enough people, our MQLs are crap, or something is wrong. The quicker, the better. I think we've all seen the data that suggests that, the quicker you get on people after they raise their hand, the more likely they are to respond and ultimately become opportunities. Similarly, once accepted, actually that time to logging that first call, email, or whatever, if you have a solution like Outreach or SalesLoft or whatever, you may be able to automate this, but the whole point is, the quicker we can reach out to people, the better. This should be, in my opinion, a mix of phone and email, and calling as quickly as possible. And then you may also have like a minimum expected follow-up. We don't want, one and dones. I think we've all seen where you get a list of, I don't know, leads from a trade show, for example, and there's 100 of them, and oh, great, we logged our first call, and then 90% of them just never get touched again if they didn't respond to that first outreach. This is obviously not desired behavior, so kind of making it easier to do that repeated follow-up, I think, goes a long way in terms of getting more out of what we're already producing. Now, all of that, we want to take well salted and tailored to your team. So some things you might want to think about with your team is, do you have a BDR team? How are some leads assigned directly to AEs and some go to BDRs? Everything goes through a BDR. What's the story there? Are you having follow-up split amongst multiple teams, either geographically or across time zones? Do we need to support different SLAs in different time zones? What does everything currently look like? Like, if we don't have any sort of existing SLA today, then coming in and doing something super complicated right away, I think, is going to lead to a lot of pain. So starting somewhere and then iterating and getting more complicated afterwards, once you learn, what your team's capacity is, will be better for you in the long run. You want to take a look at, what does our volume of inbound leads look like? Because we want to be realistic about what a human can actually handle. If you're doing the math and saying, oh, we expect people to be logging 140 calls a day, that's just probably not realistic. And we either need to, look at our scoring qualification criteria or the number of people we have, or maybe widen that window in terms of what we expect out of our team. So in terms of sort of varying levels of sophistication that you might start with, so the simplest thing you might start with is, what is the date time that we surfaced an MQL to our team, and what is the date time that they signaled in some way that, yes, they're going to take responsibility for it, and then calculating that difference between those two in business hours. Once you've got that, you may evolve onto, stamping, what's that first touch? How quickly are we logging that first touch? How many touches are we logging after the MQL? What kinds of touches? And it's even better if you can pair that with full funnel tracking in terms of all the different stages they're going through, how many touches and how quickly you're having the first touch for each stage, getting both that real time and historical reporting. Because if it's just historical, it's hard to, change our behavior in the now. So how do we actually build those automations within Salesforce itself? I'm going to start with a lot of formulas that are kind of intimidating. So this is a sample formula field for calculating the difference between two date times in business hours. So I talked earlier about how measuring that difference between MQL and SAL. This is how one way you can do that within Salesforce. It's a pretty complicated formula. You can click on the link in the title of this slide here to go to the Salesforce documentation on this. But the important pieces to note are this 8 here in 3 different places that represents the number of hours in a business day. If you have a business day that's from 9 to 5 or something like that, just 8 hours. If you're 8 to 5 or 8:30 to 5:30 or, a longer period of time, you'll want to edit that to the number of hours in your business day. And then this right here in blue is the time in UTC that your business day starts. So currently this is based on an 8-hour workday starting at 9 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, or UTC -7. If you were in Eastern Time, you would adjust that accordingly. One thing to note here is that this is not daylight savings aware. So, your time zone is going to change the start of its date twice a year. This does not account for that. So you may need to come in here twice a year and adjust your start time. Here is an example first touch SLA flag formula. So, when I showed you earlier, those flags in a list view, this is one example of how you might return that. So in this example, the SLA here is that MQLs must be accepted or rejected within 1 business day, which, as I showed in the previous slide, we have set currently as 8 business hours. And then once accepted, those accepted leads need to be touched within 1 business hour. So how I'm doing this is using an image formula in Salesforce. So, and then I've got a case formula wrapped around the whole thing so that I can return 2, 1, or 0, and then have that return a yellow, green, or red flag accordingly. So if the stage is MQL and it's been more than 8 business hours, then I'm returning 0 or a red flag. If it's been less than 8 business hours, then I'm returning 2 or a yellow flag, again, symbolizing that you haven't missed the SLA yet, but there is still action required. In the case of SALs, if the first touch this stage is blank and it's been less than 1 business hour, we'll return 2. Again, yellow flag for action is still required. and if it's blank and greater than 1 business hour, or sorry, yeah, if it's either blank or it's the time to first touch is more than 1 business hour, then we'll return a red flag. Otherwise, you met that. And then this one here is to return green for all the other stages because we don't have an SLA defined necessarily for those. Now, I talked earlier about we don't want to have one and dones either. So here's an example of how you might measure that in terms of, did we do all of the follow-up that we expect? So in this example, I'm saying that once accepted all of our SALs, we should be logging a minimum of 5 calls and 5 emails in 5 business days. However, if we already speak to the prospect and we've logged a task for ourselves in the future, and that follow-up date is greater than today, then we're all good, because once a conversation has started, I don't really care how much outreach it takes because we've talked to them. This is really just to measure, are we doing enough to try and initiate that initial conversation? So in this case here, like if the first touch is blank, then that's a problem. It's red. Whoops. If the follow-up date is greater than today, then green flag, no problem. Otherwise, we want to say, that there's a minimum of 5 or, better said, we want the number of calls to be greater or equal than the number of business days it's been since that first touch. Or if it's over 5, then you've done the minimum required and we can move on. And then the same for emails. If we don't have that, then red flag, still more action required. How I do this is I create some flows on tasks that kind of evaluate what kind of task is this, and then update the values on the leader contact. So I do this with kind of one flow and subflow where I handle lead and contact differently, but the logic of, is this task a call, email, etc., is the same. So I delegate that to the subflow, where we're just looking, is this a completed or future task? If it's a future task, we'll update the follow-up date to, the due date of that task. If it's completed, in this example, I'm just looking at calls or outbound emails or inbound emails. If we get an inbound email, we'll set the follow-up date to 1 business day in the future. Excuse me. Otherwise, we'll increment these counts of calls or emails this stage. And if those formulas that I showed a couple slides ago aren't good enough, some reasons that might be the case are if you need to support multiple time zones because you have one team in the United States and one in Europe, and your start time is drastically different. Or if you are really wanting to be aware of holidays. So, for example, we obviously don't expect people to be making calls on New Year's Day or Christmas or 4th of July or whatever. Or if you have a really tight SLA that the difference between daylight savings, that 1 hour makes a real big difference, then you'll likely need to resort to Apex and instead of the formulas to calculate the difference in business hours between 2 date times. I've created an unmanaged package here with a sample flow. It's an extended version of a package from Unofficial SF. But the basics are you feed in some business hours and 2 date times, and it spits out the difference in business hours for you. But as I said before, start somewhere. Like, even if this is aspirationally where you want to get to, maybe for right now, formulas are close enough for government work. And just as a demonstration, this utilizes the built-in business hours class in Salesforce, and you can create multiple instances of this. So for example, you might have, US business hours, which is based in the America-New York time zone, and you have certain holidays that apply there. And maybe you have a UK business hours that has those relevant holidays as well, and is in that time zone. You may even have different work hours for them. The point is they are distinct units that you can handle separately. So I talked a bit at the beginning about how reporting on this can remarkably improve your compliance with the stated and defined SLA. Not surprisingly, when I turn this on for the first time, people usually find that 70% of their queue is red. They're not measuring this, and it kind of shines a light on where problems exist, whether that be unrealistic expectations, we don't have enough people aren't trained properly, or maybe all of the above. But really, we want to be setting expectations such that we can be at least 90% in compliance here. And going back to the list view that I showed earlier, we should expect that every person that's handling inbound leads should have their list full of green flags before they leave for the day. If they're leaving a bunch of red, like you can't really catch up. But doing this really enables some really excellent reporting. This is a dashboard using Salesforce Analytics, but you can see that you can kind of get over a certain time period, what is our compliance in terms of meeting the SLA or not. And you can group this by any dimension that you're capturing, whether it's by rep, by team, by business unit, geography, segment, whatever. It really enables you some super powerful reporting. And you can kind of do this over time as well and see, is our compliance increasing, decreasing? Hopefully it's increasing across the board. But again, you can split that out by teams and kind of see really what's going on there. If you are also pairing this with a custom object where you're tracking your funnel history, which I highly recommend, that's a whole other discussion though, and working these two in concert, you can get some really, really nice reporting historically, and get at what is our compliance rate by stage over time, again by slice and dice that by whatever dimension you so choose. And we really want that to be greater than 90%. In terms of case study, we recently turned this on for a client, and immediately they realized that their time to first outreach and the follow-up was just not where they wanted it to be. And getting this visibility has allowed them to quickly and consistently follow up on their MQLs, and they've seen about a 50% lift in their conversion from demo request to opportunity. And this report was really a shock to me. I expected the conversion from MQL to SAL to be much better when that first touch SLA was met, but I didn't expect it to be 0 when the SLA was missed. In this org, they keep everything in the MQL stage until a meeting is set. And then they have an SAL as like a 0 stage opportunity. So it was pretty remarkable for me to see that they had literally 0 meetings if they missed the first touch. TLDR, we got to agree on exactly the details of what is our SLA in terms of who's responsible, what are the fallbacks if the process is not followed, and what is expected of the person who's responsible at every point in the process. Where possible, we want to automate that so that we can help speed them up and prevent human error. We want to make it as easy as possible for our people calling on our leads to manage, what their queue looks like and enable them to quickly see what is still action required here. And then actually report on this both in real time and historically so that we can maybe adjust the rules if it makes sense, or, double down on training. But this really makes the manager's life easier because they can very quickly see, are there problem children? Is the whole process a problem, etc. And so that's it. Thank you very much, and I hope you found this helpful.